Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
It gives us this greater question about history.
You never live long enough to know all the lives that you impact.
I think it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch. It's a great opportunity.
How a legendary architect is involved in a unique opportunity for college students that gives them real-life experience. Plus, the St. Louisan and New York Times best-selling author talks about her latest fantasy book. And then groundbreaking research by the Danforth Plant Science Center that could help farmers fight disease in crops. But first, a group who's building a world-class research center while trying to attract talent to St. Louis. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
This section of North St. Louis, near the intersection of Jefferson and Cass Avenues, about a half-mile west of the old Pruitt-Igoe housing complex, is about to be transformed into the 700,000-plus square foot campus of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA. And some local civic, academic, and government institutions are joining forces to make St. Louis the nation's geospatial technology hub through the creation of the Taylor Geospatial Institute.
Our mission is to promote geospatial science research through innovative collaboration, partnership, and developing technologies to address world's grand challenges in food security, health systems, national security, and also in other areas like workforce and talent training, etc.
The Taylor Institute is joining forces with 8 area research facilities, including St. Louis University, Washington University, the Danforth Plant Science Center, Harris-Stowe State University, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, University of Missouri Science and Technology, University of Missouri St. Louis, and the University of Missouri Columbia.
Geospatial is a cutting-edge science world, if you will. It's just not about national security. It's about other things. It's about food security. It's about, climate. And we can mine that and have some of the best men and women here in St. Louis.
Its mission is to promote research and innovation in 4 main areas: building a world-class research base, collaborating with world-class research facilities, building partnerships to turn that research into products, and developing, creating, and attracting talented professionals to the area. To do that, the Taylor Institute is taking some of its inspiration from another very successful local endeavor.
If you look at, a couple of other models, for instance, the Danforth Plant Science Center, Bill Danforth and a few others basically had this view that here we are in the middle of the United States in the ag center of the country, and that if we put our shoulder to the wheel in ag tech and we can attract some really interesting people here, scientists and so forth, we basically have the same opportunity here because we have the NGA West.
I see what's happening in St. Louis region as a watershed movement in geospatial science. And many of us believe that geospatial science and technology is the enabler of next industrial revolution. The potential of St. Louis becoming a global hub for geospatial science and technology, it's a big deal.
In the past, it was the NGA was going to do it all themselves, but they have recognized that there's so much technology and interesting things, brilliant things going on in the ecosystem around all that they don't have to invent everything. They can go out and harvest those things. If we nurture it and work with the NGA here in town, I think we'll attract some of the best and brightest. I think we will invent things, and I think it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch. It's a great opportunity.
From 20 years from now, when we look back, we all should be proud of what we did today. And what I see and envision is that nationally, globally, people think of St. Louis, talk about St. Louis when it comes to geospatial science and technologies.
Scan the QR code on your screen to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
I'm Jay Scherter, Communications Senior Manager for the Regional Arts Commission of St. Louis, and I'm so happy to be talking about the Gil Abada Fellowship. Gio Obata is a legend. He is world-renowned for the work that he's done in design and engineering. You can see his work all over the world and right here in St. Louis, from the planetarium over at the St. Louis Science Center to Lambert Airport. To have Gio Obata's namesake on our fellowship is humbling. It's an extreme honor because what he believed in is certainly what this program's all about. And so this program is an amazing experience for a college-age student. They get a 10-week paid internship and they get real-life experience partnering with a local arts organization. Places like COCA, the National Blues Museum, Central Print.
My name is Marissa Camp. I graduated from Webster University and I am a Gio Obata Fellow with the Regional Arts Commission. I was placed with Central Print. They're a nonprofit arts organization that focuses on letterpress printing and preservation.
I have always had an interest in the nonprofit space. I sort of grew up in that realm because my mother worked in it and the schools that I went to were very involved with community service. So I just had a natural inclination towards working in nonprofit and also finding a way to work with arts and my degree in community aspect. One of the bigger things I've learned is about the fluidity of the nonprofit space. We do a lot of different things and you have to kind of just learn to adapt and figure out how to do jobs. Marie, the director for Central Print, does everything here. So just getting to see how she leads and how other people lead is another thing. There's lots of different ways to impact others and there's not one way to do that. I'm a visual artist and so it's nice being in a space that caters to visual artists. It's energizing being around so many professionals. Central Print is in Old North, which has a really vibrant community, so it's nice seeing all of the neighbors and getting to know all the people who come around so often. It's also nice just because it's like an extenuation of school, or I'm getting to learn a lot of new practices and I have ways that I can incorporate stuff that Central Print does into my own practice, which is really nice. The most interesting thing is just navigating funding. We're always looking for grant funding and donations and fundraisers and different ways to keep the space moving. Everything that we do depends on having community and volunteers, but that's also what makes the space special. It's been really nice getting to actually work in the space. I've met a nice group of people that I hope to still have relationships with after the fellowship. And it's just been really encouraging towards my goals for the future.
We certainly hope this program goes on for a very long time because of the need in the St. Louis area. We're going to start reaching out to colleges very soon. The program just ended this summer, but we're already going to be gearing up for next year, probably in September or October, to start reaching out to students and make sure they know about this incredible opportunity. We're really encouraging anybody to share it with someone that you think might fit well in the arts world, whether or not they're going down that path right now or not.
For more info about the Gio Obata Fellowship, visit racstl.org/Gio-Obata-Fellowship.
Ignite student thinking and inspire student learning with Educate.today's ever-growing collection of first-person, real-world, expert-driven, standards-aligned videos and interactive programs. High quality and student-centered on a secure, ad-free website, thousands of streaming and downloadable videos on a wide range of topics take learners from elementary through high school, inside the labs, inside the studios, and inside the minds of exceptionally diverse thinkers, creators, dreamers, and achievers who do the work, apply the skills, and live the history students are studying. Ready for use in class and at home, your journey of learning begins today at Educate.today.
Hollywood producers turn a local story into a movie later on Spotlight.
What sits at the core of author Roshani Chokshi's several middle grade and young adult fantasy novels? A few things, actually. A well-rounded and layered depiction of marginalized characters. an exploration of new worlds often rooted in or inspired by the mythology of real cultures. And moreover, a complex and impactful story that captivates readers. A St. Louis-born New York Times best-selling author, Roshani Chokshi, is a powerful writer that's been inspiring young minds for the past 5 years. I got the chance to speak with her about her captivating book, The Bronzed Beasts, the latest in her Gilded Wolves fantasy series. We also talk about developing meaningful characters of color in a world where minority voices are often reduced or misrepresented.
One of the biggest challenges of being an author of color in this industry is that we have to constantly remind everybody that people of color are not a monolith.
And her favorite and least favorite parts of writing a book in a larger series.
But I think the first books are the hardest because you're trying to explain the rules of the world, give a roadmap, and hopefully do it in such a way that you're not overwhelming a reader, but instead ensnaring them in a brand new world.
Her humor and talent are obvious within the first moments of our conversation, but the reward of her writing is best experienced on the page.
The Gilded Wolves series is such a uniquely diverse book series, whether that be through the characters that are developed or through the plot twists that I never see coming.
The Gilded Wolves honestly started because I really like National Treasure. That is my comfort show. It is so bad that it just transcends all artistic integrity and becomes sacred in my mind. When I was a kid and watching National Treasure, I don't know why, maybe it's just some sort of like, Nicolas Cage, interesting, like fascinated by him as an artist, but also somewhat recoil like when I watch his movies. And I knew, when I started thinking about what I was going to write after I'd finished The Star-Touched Queen and A Crown of Wishes, I remember I was sick one day and I was in bed and I was watching National Treasure. And I just thought to myself, this is going to be so fun. I'm going to write something that is just a treasure hunt with riddles because I love riddles. I'm going to set it in 19th century Paris because I love Paris. And I just love the idea of Belle Epoque France. And then it all sort of fell apart from there. Everything fell apart because the problem is, once you start with a kernel of an idea, then you have to scratch at it and just be like, all right, well, okay, let's say I'm going to set this book in 1889. What the heck was happening in 1889? And when people think about the imagery of Paris, one of the first thing that comes to mind is always the Eiffel Tower. One thing that I learned was that the Eiffel Tower was actually built to serve as the entrance to the 1889 Exposition Universelle, the World Fair. And this was an exciting time. Like, people are showing off their cool new technological innovations, all that kind of stuff. However, at that time, the biggest attraction of the Exposition Universelle was a human zoo, which is as horrible as it sounds. It drew 28 million visitors, and it was African natives on display. And the entire point of it was to celebrate Europe's civilizing mission. They were just like, look at all like the sophistication and culture and elegance that we are bringing to quote unquote primitive societies. And the Exposition Universelle was not alone in that. The London World Fair, it had, I think, indigenous people from the Indian subcontinent. The St. Louis World Fair actually had the Igorot people on display, which were indigenous groups of the Philippines. And my mother is from the Philippines. And so all of a sudden, this story that had started off as something that was just supposed to be lighthearted ended up becoming me interrogating the fact that I am absolutely a product of colonialism. My father is from India. My mother is from the Philippines. I became curious about how objects got into museums and who put them there. And there can still be all the fun treasure hunting aspects and riddles and puzzles, but it gives us this greater question about history and who gets to write it. And that's kind of how the Gilded Wolves went from a very, very silly, happy idea to something that essentially became an existential crisis wrapped in a, Book of Job fan fiction with some Faustian twist thrown in there. It's been a hard couple of years.
To find out what it's like for her to wrap up 2 of her series, watch the full interview at hecmedia.org. The first publicly funded kindergarten in the U.S. opened in 1873 in De Pere School on Michigan Avenue in St. Louis. It was started by St. Louisan Susan Blow. Known as the mother of the public kindergarten movement, Blow served as the director and also began training other teachers. By 1880, Blow had helped to start 58 kindergartens in St. Louis, serving over 9,000 students. She's credited with creating the national model for adding early childhood education to public schools across the country.
HEC Media. Recognized, celebrated, honored time and again for excellence in the industry. Mid-America Emmys, Tellys, NATOAs, Auroras, and other awards. HEC Media has been bringing home the hardware for over a decade. Hundreds of nominations and wins, from regional to international levels. Arts and education to author talks, magazine shows and documentaries, individual craft achievements to overall excellence, plus so much more. And although doing good work is its own reward, recognition, well, it's nice too. See what all the fuss is about. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
When there's a threat to human welfare, it's met with a strong response. In this case, scientists at the Danforth Plant Science Center in St. Louis are on the front lines fighting for the future of the global food system. They are combating a disease that threatens one of the world's key crops, cassava.
So everybody knows about corn and rice. Those are the crops that we're really familiar with here in the U.S. Cassava is just as important as those crops. It's a source of starch for millions of people, but it's primarily grown and eaten by people who live in the tropics, so Central and South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia.
Cassava research in the Becky Bart Lab at Danforth is uniting scientists globally as farmers may suffer huge yield losses.
It is susceptible to a couple of diseases, one of which is cassava mosaic disease. This is a DNA Gemini virus pathogen of cassava that infects the cassava plant. It's transmitted by little white fly insects.
It's a DNA virus which will get into the plant cell. It hijacks the plant's DNA replication system in the plant cells and uses that for itself, and then it will replicate very, very quickly. It can be really devastating. You could lose 50 or more % of the yield.
Danforth associate member and principal investigator Dr. Nigel Taylor has been studying cassava for 30 years. Crops infected with cassava mosaic disease don't fully develop the storage roots that are used for food. The starchy root crop is rich in carbohydrates. It's one of the most important staple crops in the world, feeding nearly 1 billion people.
Cassava mosaic disease does not yet exist in Latin America. If it gets to Latin America, it will be a huge problem because none of the varieties grown in South America and the Caribbean, none of them have resistance to cassava mosaic disease.
But research in the Becky Bart Lab at Danforth is part of a collaboration that now has the world a step closer to the possibility of planting disease-resistant crops.
So our discovery is the gene in cassava that protects it from this virus. So there's a lot of different varieties of cassava out there. Some don't have this specific gene and are therefore susceptible to the pathogen. If they have this certain variation, this mutation in this gene, then they are resistant to this disease, just genetic resistance.
The gene that we found the mutation in, it's called DNA polymerase. And it's a really interesting protein because it's part of a complex that replicates all the DNA inside of our cells.
For the discovery, research associate Carrie Gilbert used big data analytics.
Folks around the world have been working on the problem of cassava plants and this virus for a long time, and they've generated a lot of data. And so I was able to access this publicly available data, sequencing data, disease data, and look to see which plants are resistant and maybe do they have the same mutation. And we did.
The work sheds light on how to maintain resistance.
You might have one cassava plant that's really, really productive, produces huge roots underground. That's what people eat, is these storage roots, but happens to be susceptible to this disease. So you can cross that variety of cassava with a variety of cassava that has the resistance and get new varieties of cassava that combine those two traits.
The discovery offers hope for other major crops experiencing attacks by this family of closely related viruses.
Gemini viruses, like the one that causes cassava mosaic disease, are very common. They infect lots of different crops, cotton, tomato, grape, a lot of other ones as well. And in many of those cases, there are no known disease resistance control strategies. So what we're interested in doing now is figuring out whether or not we can take our discovery from cassava and recreate it in some of these other plants to generate a novel source of resistance.
This discovery could be made to operate in some of the most important crops in the world, such as cotton, maize, beans, tomato, to improve the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people.
HEC celebrates St. Louis like no other media outlet, highlighting those making a difference through science and technology.
It's a wonderful community of young entrepreneurs who are all doing very amazing things.
Focusing on arts and education.
Poverty is not going to stop a student from getting a quality education. We can't let that happen.
Broadcasting meetings and functions to educate and inform our community.
St. Louis feels like a city on the road to extraordinary things.
Producing compelling documentaries celebrating our region.
Henry Shaw founded the Missouri Botanical Garden, one of the first of its kind in the country and one of the best of its kind in the world.
Visit hecmedia.org for up-to-date, locally produced stories about the people and organizations who make St. Louis great.
It's a story that began in a garage in 1987 when a young boy started literally playing with fire. It's a story John O'Leary used to think no one wanted to hear.
When I was 9 years old, I was in a house fire, burned on 100% of my body, and did not know that it was a story worthy of being shared. I had assumed it was a tragic event and something that I personally endured and had somehow survived and moved on from.
But in time, O'Leary realized his story was worth the telling, and that sharing it could help others understand the ups and downs of their own life stories.
The story is not tragic, it's actually triumphant.
That realization finally came to him well into adulthood, after his parents wrote Overwhelming Odds, a book about their life experience trying to deal with their son's near-death experience.
I think John, in looking at this, realized for the first time, this really is a story. You know, I accomplished unbelievable odds, and I survived. And my parents are now sharing this story, and I think he was proud of it.
Proud enough that John O'Leary later wrote his own book, On Fire. And it was that version of the story which caught the attention of a couple of movie producers who are self-financing a film based on O'Leary's inspirational story. Many prominent St. Louisans are already investing in the project, including Terry Schnook, an executive producer of the film, who is also working to recruit other local investors. Schnook has been producing shows for years on Broadway, winning 5 Tony Awards along the way. Some of the world's most impactful films have been financed privately, including Coda, 2022's Oscar winner for Best Picture. During a recent visit to St. Louis, the producers sat down for an interview with HEC President Dennis Riggs.
What about that story? It's a tremendous story, but what about that spoke to you and said, this is a film, this is a movie?
When a young man's story changes your life to such a degree that it changed mine, when I realized that you simply never live long enough to know all the lives that you impact, which is the underbelly of the story of what happened with all the relationships with John inside the hospital during his recovery.
And one of those relationships in particular involves someone familiar to everyone in St. Louis. O'Leary talked about it with HEC's Nancy Pasternak in 2016.
I can't think of anyone who was bigger in my life than Jack Buck. After being burned, I'm laying in my hospital bed about 24 hours after I come in. I'm tied down, can't move, I can't see because my face is so swollen, and I can't communicate because I'm on a trach. So these are some of the challenges that this little pain-riddled 9-year-old are dealing with. But I could listen, I could hear. And into this room comes the voice of the Cardinals, everyone's hero in this community, but in particular in mine. I was a huge Cardinal fan. I hear his footsteps, don't know who it is yet. The chair gets pulled across the floor. I hear a cough, and then I hear the voice of the legendary announcer Jack Buck, who says, "Kid, wake up. You are going to live. You are going to survive. Keep fighting."
He did wake up. He did keep fighting. And 7 months later, the Cardinals held John O'Leary Day at Busch Stadium. But that is not where the story ends. To encourage O'Leary to learn to write again, even though his fingers had been amputated, Buck arranged for O'Leary to receive 60 autographed baseballs on the condition that he found a way to write each donor a thank you note.
That's the crystal ball that he gives away.
As a college graduation present, Buck gave O'Leary the crystal baseball given to him by the Baseball Hall of Fame.
I think it's a universal story. I think it's an inspirational, faith-friendly story. They're the one movie still that, is a reliable box office draw, that and Marvel movies.
Right now, funding the film is still a work in progress.
Hey, Dad, I need your help.
It's not going to be easy.
I don't need easy. I just need possible.
Sean McNamara, who directed the inspirational film Soul Surfer, has agreed to direct the movie version of On Fire.
What more can I do?
In the meantime, John O'Leary, who grew up to become a real estate developer, now works full-time delivering his message of hope as an international speaker, telling his story to tens of thousands of people every year. And when the producers are successful at raising the money they need to bring his story to the screen, it could reach an audience of millions. Production is expected to begin in 2023.
What do you think this is going to do for St. Louis as this movie breaks?
I think people who really know St. Louis know it's a great town anyway. But I think people who've just heard about, this problem or that problem, I think people are going to see St. Louis in a slightly new light.
When we look back at the darkest times in our life, we realize not only was it dark, but it's also where we grew the most. In that time, that's actually when we hit bottom, we find the foundation, we leap back forward, and we make our greatest growth afterwards.
Inspiration is inspiration. Everybody loves baseball, number one, and everybody loves Jack Buck. And when they get to know John O'Leary, they will love him too.
For more information about how you can participate in funding production of On Fire, look for this story on our website, hecmedia.org. That's where you'll find direct links to the producers of the film. Next week, the latest exhibit at the Art Museum and the celebrated artists being featured, including a profile of German artist Max Beckmann. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.